Katherine's lips curled into something between a smile and a frown. It wasn't comforting. "Neither do I," she said softly, before turning back toward the window, her expression unreadable. Joan didn't know why, but she felt compelled to stay. Something about Katherine made her feel safe, even though she knew it should have been the opposite. It wasn't just the quiet intensity of Katherine's presence, it was something deeper, something unspoken. Katherine didn't seem like a normal girl, not by any stretch of the imagination. "I'm Joan," she said, stepping closer, feeling a strange pull toward Katherine. "I just got here. I don't really know what to do." Katherine didn't look at her. She didn't have to. "It's cold," she said, her voice soft and distant. "There's no reason to leave, not yet." Joan blinked, unsure of what to make of the statement. "What do you mean?" But Katherine didn't answer. She didn't seem to need to. She was already lost in her own thoughts again, as though Joan were no more significant than the snowfall outside. As the days passed, the tension between Joan and Katherine began to grow, subtle but undeniable. Joan couldn't shake the feeling that Katherine wasn't just another girl at the school. There was something dark about her, something in her eyes that made Joan uneasy, even as she felt an inexplicable bond with her. Katherine seemed to exist outside of time and space, her movements so deliberate and precise that they felt unnatural. It wasn't just the way she looked at Joan, it was the way she seemed to anticipate her every move, her every thought. Joan began to confide in Katherine, telling her things she'd never spoken about to anyone before, about her time in the institution, the faces of the doctors that haunted her dreams, the way they whispered her name when they thought she couldn't hear. She spoke of the dark shadows that followed her, the sense of something always lurking just beyond her vision, waiting to pull her into the abyss. Katherine listened without judgment. She didn't say much in return, but her quiet presence seemed to fill the empty spaces in Joan's mind. Sometimes, Joan thought she saw something in Katherine's eyes, something that mirrored her own fears. A flicker of recognition, maybe. Or perhaps it was just a reflection of her own madness. She wasn't sure anymore, but the more time Joan spent with Katherine, the more she realized that she wasn't the only one haunted by something. Something lurked in the corners of this place. Something dark, and it was watching them. One night, Joan awoke to the sound of whispers in her room. Soft, murmuring voices that seemed to call her name. She sat up, her heart pounding, but when she looked around the room, there was no one there. No one except the shadows, stretching long and thin across the walls, their forms shifting with the flickering light of the candle on her nightstand. She tried to shake it off, but the whispering wouldn't stop. It was as if the very walls of the school were alive, listening, waiting for something. The whispers grew louder, more urgent. Joan stood up, her legs unsteady as she stumbled toward the door. She had to find Katherine. She had to. Something was wrong. Something was horribly wrong with this place. She had to leave, but when she opened the door, she found Katherine standing in the hallway, her face pale and expressionless, as though she had been waiting for Joan. The whispering stopped. The air grew cold. "I told you not to leave," Katherine said quietly, her voice almost a whisper itself. "Not yet." Joan shivered, unsure of what Katherine meant, or what was happening. But she knew one thing for certain, whatever had brought her here, whatever dark thing was waiting for them, was now closer than ever, and it wasn't going to let them leave, not without a price. The narrative shifts to Katherine's past, unearthing unsettling details about her family's history. As the story progresses, Katherine's seemingly erratic and disturbing behavior is explored in depth, suggesting a deeper, more sinister cause than merely her apparent loneliness or troubled upbringing. It becomes clear that Katherine's parents were not just negligent or absent, but deeply involved in occult practices. Hidden diaries, letters, and fragments of conversations hint at dark rituals and a long-standing connection to the supernatural, dating back several generations. These rituals, some of which Katherine herself was likely exposed to as a child, point to a form of demonic worship, a tradition passed down through her family. The practices are described in cryptic terms, suggesting that Katherine's parents may have been involved in a sect that believed in the summoning and control of malevolent spirits, or even demonic entities, as part of their religious practices. In one chilling flashback, a young Katherine is seen in a large, decrepit house, her parents whispering incantations in a hidden room. The air is thick with an oppressive energy, and the walls seem to pulse with dark intent. Katherine, barely a teenager at the time, witnesses a ritual meant to invoke an unknown power, the details of which are disturbing and vague but undoubtedly tied to dark forces. As the ritual intensifies, Katherine's own sense of agency begins to wane, her body no longer obeying her own will, as if something far more powerful is starting to take control. As the story delves further into Katherine's behavior, it becomes clear that her actions are not the result of simple adolescent rebellion or trauma. The strange occurrences in the boarding school, her eerie calmness, her ability to manipulate situations around her, and her unearthly connection to the sinister events unfolding, point to a deeper, supernatural force at play. Her memories of childhood, where she would have vivid, disturbing dreams of a shadowy figure watching her from the corner of her room, are revealed as far more than mere nightmares. The presence of the entity, which Katherine calls the Dark One, is hinted to have been with her since childhood. Her parents, aware of its influence, sought to control it through their rituals, but it seems as though they ultimately failed, or perhaps they sought to use Katherine as a vessel for something even darker. In the boarding school, Katherine begins to show signs of becoming an unwilling conduit for the force that has followed her since birth. Her erratic actions and the strange behaviors she exhibits are not merely the result of her mental instability but a manifestation of the demonic force within her. The feeling of something watching her, the whispers that no one else hears, and the unsettling sense of her being called by something in the dark all point to the possibility that Katherine may be a victim of her parents' twisted beliefs and their failure to keep the force at bay. At this point in the story, Joan, the seemingly mute and passive character, comes to the forefront, revealing a shocking connection to Katherine's story. Through a series of fragmented memories and dreams, Joan recalls a horrific event from her own past, one that ties directly into the occult events surrounding Katherine's family. Joan's trauma traces back to a previous life, one in which she was also a victim of the occult practices that Katherine's parents were involved in. In Joan's recollection, she was part of a family who had also become entangled with dark forces, but unlike Katherine, Joan was not chosen to be the vessel or the focal point of the dark rituals. Instead, Joan's family was sacrificed in a ritual meant to ensure the power of the demonic entity Katherine's parents sought to control. In a particularly harrowing memory, Joan describes a night when her own family was slaughtered as part of a blood ritual. Her mother, in a state of trance, led the family into an old, decrepit church where a ceremony was to be held. Joan, still a young girl at the time, was an unwilling participant, dragged into the ritual despite her obvious fear and resistance. The ceremony was meant to summon a demon, and as it progressed, the air grew thick with an overwhelming sense of dread. Joan's last memory of her family was their mutilation as they were sacrificed, their blood spilled on the cold stone floor in a grotesque parody of worship. Joan's memory is fragmented, but the horror of it is undeniable. She witnessed firsthand the full extent of the evil her family had been drawn into, and she realizes, too late, that her family had not only been victims but had, in some twisted way, facilitated the summoning of the entity that now haunts Katherine. The ritual performed in Joan's life was, in a way, a precursor to what Katherine would eventually face. As Joan recalls this traumatic event, she is struck by a revelation. The connection between her past and Katherine's present is not coincidental. Both Joan and Katherine are drawn to the same malevolent force, a force that seeks to use them both for its own dark purposes. Joan realizes that her life has been haunted by the same force ever since the ritual that destroyed her family. She has been reborn, as it were, into this life to witness the final, inevitable conclusion of the dark practices her family once engaged in. Joan shares this memory with Katherine, who, at first, does not understand the full gravity of what Joan is saying. However, as the story progresses, Katherine begins to experience flashes of Joan's memories, as if the two are becoming spiritually connected. The memories that once seemed to belong only to Joan now seem to bleed into Katherine's own reality. The rituals, the shadows, the whispers, everything Joan endured is now part of Katherine's life, and she is forced to confront the truth of her own existence and the horrible legacy that has been passed down to her. As the truth unravels, the relationship between Katherine and Joan becomes more complex. Joan, once a passive observer of Katherine's descent into madness, now sees herself as both a witness and a participant in the horrific events. She begins to understand that her own life has been irrevocably intertwined with Katherine's from the moment she first encountered the dark presence that haunts them both. The story suggests that Katherine's descent into madness is not entirely her own fault. She is a victim of her parents' choices and the rituals they performed. However, it is also evident that Katherine's connection to the demon or dark force is not something she can easily escape. She is destined, in some way, to be part of the cycle of evil that has plagued her family for generations. Joan's role, too, is not one of simple victimhood. She is a key figure in the struggle against the entity, someone who understands the horrific truth but is powerless to stop it. As the chapter draws to a close, the supernatural forces at work become undeniable. The evil that has been festering within Katherine for years is beginning to break free, and the lines between the past and the present blur. The memories of both Joan and Katherine weave together, creating a horrifying tapestry of ritualistic abuse, demonic influence, and familial tragedy. The chapter ends on a note of impending dread, with the true nature of Katherine's fate now clear. She is not simply a troubled teenager but a vessel for something far darker, and there may be no escaping the cycle of horror that her family has set in motion. This chapter marks a significant turning point in the Blackcoat's Daughter, where the supernatural elements become clearer and the intertwined destinies of Katherine and Joan take center stage. It reveals the depth of Katherine's family's occult involvement and provides Joan with the opportunity to confront her own traumatic past, all while deepening the sense of dread that permeates the story. The chapter opens with Katherine's increasingly disturbing behavior, which is becoming impossible to ignore. Her physical appearance is gaunt and unnatural, her eyes empty, as though she is no longer entirely herself. Her classmates and teachers notice her transformation, but no one can quite place the cause. She moves through the world with a chilling detachment, her once pristine demeanor now a mask of cold indifference. At times, it seems as if she is not even aware of her actions. Her movements are mechanical, as though controlled by something outside of herself. Her conversations have become clipped and emotionless. When she speaks, her voice lacks warmth, and there are moments when she stares into space, completely unresponsive, only to snap back into reality moments later with an unnerving calm. Her behavior in class grows erratic, alternating between fits of unprovoked laughter and fits of anger. She grows distant from the few peers who try to engage with her, casting them aside with a chilling, detached cruelty. The students and staff are all too aware that something is wrong, but no one dares to intervene. Katherine's relationship with Joan, already strained by their shared experiences, becomes even more tense. Joan notices the change in Katherine before anyone else. She sees how Katherine's eyes gleam with an unnatural intensity, how she is drawn to dark corners of the school, speaking to herself in hushed tones, as though listening to something no one else can hear. Joan begins to sense that Katherine is not entirely human, or at least not entirely in control of herself. She wonders if Katherine is being possessed by some malevolent force, and the idea fills her with a deep, visceral dread. There are moments where Katherine seems to slip away from her body, her mind adrift, and Joan can't help but feel that she is merely a vessel for something else, a puppet controlled by an unseen force. The once glimmering potential for redemption or recovery in Katherine is fading, replaced by an ever-deepening darkness. Katherine's movements seem more erratic, her eyes darker and more hollow, and Joan fears that the sinister force is gradually consuming her from within.